A tourist threw coffee at a royal guard and thought it was just a prank, but he didn't expect this. Every day, Buckingham Palace welcomes thousands of tourists from around the world. Amid the magnificent space of the palace, between the ancient stones and walls surrounded by the majesty of history, stands a guard who always stands firm, motionless, embodying unwavering loyalty. He is no ordinary man. He is a royal guard, a living symbol of tradition and discipline. Yet, one day, at one of the most sacred and prestigious locations in the United Kingdom, a young tourist decided to challenge this guard. He thought that a small act, throwing a cup of coffee at the guard, would create a funny video, delighting his followers on social media. It's just a prank, he thought. No one will notice. But he didn't expect that, within the next few seconds, his action would turn into one of the most embarrassing moments of his life. A lightning-fast reaction, a powerful gesture, and the entire square fell silent in astonishment. No one in the crowd could believe their eyes when the coffee cup, flying through the air, was caught by the royal guard's hand without a single drop touching his bright red uniform. This incident was no longer just a prank. It had become a lesson in respect and discipline, where a guard, with perfect calmness and control, taught everyone who witnessed it an important lesson. A lesson that the young tourist would never forget, and a moment that would become legendary, spreading across the world. What happened next? Would this tourist realize the gravity of his actions? And could the values of tradition and honor be conveyed through such a simple yet powerful response? This story began with a cup of coffee, but it ended with a much deeper lesson about respect and discipline in a world where these values are gradually fading. Certainly, not only the tourist but all of us can learn something from this moment. Buckingham Palace, the heart of England, where every stone, every statue contains a long story of history, reverence, and power. On mornings like that day, as the sun slowly rises over the horizon, its golden rays shine through the ancient windows, creating a mystical scene against the sky. The gentle fog drifts around the stone columns and streets, giving the air around the palace an almost magical quality, a sense of stepping into another world where everything bears the mark of history. Standing at the great gates of the palace is the indispensable image, royal guards, the living symbols of England. Each royal guard is not just an ordinary soldier. They are warriors trained rigorously, enduring countless challenges, and bearing all hardships to protect one of the nation's most treasured legacies. Their bright red uniforms, tall black fur hats, polished black boots, especially their motionless stance, everything reflects a commitment and unwavering loyalty. Michael Bennett is one of those soldiers. He is not a rookie. At 27, he had already completed 3 combat tours, journeys that few could even imagine. These experiences had shaped him, turning him from a young soldier into a symbol of patience and courage. Even standing still throughout the long morning, Michael never allowed himself to slack off. Every gesture, every look was carefully calculated, every action reflecting perfection in the work he was performing. Michael's image is not just that of a guard. He is the embodiment of tradition, honor, and dedication. The royal guards are not there just as statues. They are unsung warriors, not only protecting a royal family but a nation, safeguarding values that the whole world admires. While tourists from all over the world come to admire the beauty of the palace, some come not just to visit but to learn about the history and the stories hidden behind each corner of the building. However, not everyone understands the profound meaning of these guards. To them, royal guards are just living statues, highlights in photos. And this is where the lack of understanding and respect begins. When people only see the exterior without understanding the significance and responsibility of those standing in uniform. And then, on an ordinary morning, as the sunlight shone on each brick of the palace, a young tourist with delusions of internet fame decided to challenge one of these guards. He didn't understand that, in the moments to follow, his actions would become more than a senseless prank, but a moment that would test patience and respect he had never considered. Buckingham Palace, a place that had witnessed hundreds of years of history and great battles, would soon be the scene of an unforgettable confrontation. While tourists from all over the world focused on perfect photos of Buckingham Palace, another story was being written. A story not about praise, but about provocation, disrespect, and a great lesson in discipline and honor. But it didn't stop there. What would happen when a steadfast guard faced direct challenge from a tourist? And could he hold his ground, not only protecting the palace but also the values that the world holds in high regard? This story is not just about a battle between one person and another, but a timeless lesson about patience, respect, and responsibility. And it begins with a royal guard and a cup of coffee at Buckingham Palace. At Buckingham Palace, during the peaceful moments of the morning, everything seemed to pass quietly and simply. But among the crowded tourists, there was one person who stood out, breaking the calm: Richard, a young man trying to make a mark among thousands of others. Richard was not an ordinary tourist. He was someone who craved attention, seeking to become an internet star. From his humorous slogan t-shirts to his flashy style with designer sunglasses and a fancy camera hanging by his side, Richard was the type of person who always needed attention. He never stopped to question whether his actions might affect anyone else. His only goal was to create viral moments for his social media account. And Buckingham Palace, with its solemn royal guards standing watch, was a new gold mine for Richard to carry out his pranks. From the moment Richard appeared, the atmosphere around him shifted. He showed no respect for those around him, especially the royal guards standing motionless in their red uniforms and tall black fur hats. He decided to make a video, filming the image of the guard, not to admire him, but to mock him. Richard, holding his phone, began planning his disruption. He raised his voice, making sure the whole crowd noticed. "Look at this, folks. Watch me make this guy famous." With his self-satisfied and humorous remarks, Richard approached the royal guard. "Your hat is bigger than my future," Richard shouted, causing some of the tourists in the crowd to laugh. But instead of showing respect, Richard seemed to revel in the mockery he was creating. The laughter from his friends grew louder, encouraging him to go even further. Those around him began to feel uncomfortable. Children were left standing, surprised and somewhat frightened. Parents exchanged uneasy glances, a sense of confusion spreading through the square. Some people shook their heads in disapproval, but no one dared intervene, as Richard was too loud and all eyes were on him. Richard began to lose patience. He no longer just wanted to mock. He wanted to challenge the discipline of the guard. "Come on, buddy, how can you just stand still like that? Must be asleep? Huh?" he shouted again, once more sowing disrespect. This time, Richard decided to escalate, throwing a crumpled paper napkin at the guard's shiny boots. The crinkling of the paper echoed through the air, and despite everyone seeing it, the guard remained motionless, with no response whatsoever. But that wasn't all. Richard, growing more excited, thought this would be the perfect conclusion to his prank. He looked at the cup of coffee in his hand, mischievously, then began to move closer to the royal guard. "This guy won't do anything. Let's see," Richard thought to himself. He prepared to lift the coffee cup, ensuring the crowd was focused on him. It seemed as if it was just him and the royal guard, two figures, one challenging, the other steadfast, standing under the curious gaze of the crowd. In just a few seconds, the atmosphere at Buckingham Square completely changed. Richard, with the cup of coffee in hand, once again aimed his target at the royal guard. The tension rose, as it seemed the only thing left was the climax, and now the crowd's attention was no longer focused on the guard but on Richard, who had chosen to challenge him directly. He paused for a moment, sipping his coffee as if enjoying the attention he believed he was receiving. His eyes scanned the surrounding crowd, noticing that everyone was turning to look at him, some filming, others just standing there, waiting to see what would happen next. But Richard felt no warning signs. He didn't notice the change in the air. The crowd began to feel a hint of discomfort, and Richard's smug face only heightened the tension in the space. "Look at this," Richard continued, seemingly unaware that he was pushing things too far. "I bet this guy doesn't feel a thing. Come on, let's give it a try. Right, folks?" He spoke loudly while lifting the coffee cup, entirely unaware that, once again, he was cutting off any respect the guard deserved. The atmosphere now felt surreal. The laughter that once echoed had died down. All eyes were on Richard and the guard. The air was thick, and you could almost feel the silence hanging, moments before the storm broke. While some tourists around him began to look uncomfortable, others tried to go back to admiring the palace. But this event had pierced through the calm like an arrow, shattering any peace. At that moment, Richard's friends began to grow uneasy, but not because of his provocation. They were worried about how this situation might come back to affect them, as one of them suddenly realized that things might not be as simple as Richard thought. "You're taking this too far, Richard," one friend whispered, but Richard didn't care. He just laughed and continued to raise the coffee cup. "Let's see what happens," he said smugly. And then, the moment came. Without any warning, just a swift movement. As Richard was about to throw the coffee, the royal guard responded with lightning-fast reflexes. From standing motionless like a statue, Michael Bennet suddenly became a warrior, reacting with a speed beyond belief. His right hand shot up like a lightning bolt, catching the coffee cup midair, not letting a single drop fall onto his uniform. The silence that fell over Buckingham Square was as thick as a dark cloth. All eyes were on Michael, the royal guard, but not with curiosity about his calmness, but with surprise and astonishment. No one could believe what had just happened. The coffee cup, which Richard thought he could easily throw at a guard, was caught perfectly in midair, without a single drop staining Michael's bright red uniform. Even in this moment, the crowd seemed to feel like time had stopped, the air thick with tension. Only a few quiet sounds came from phones capturing this legendary moment. Everything suddenly became extremely tense. Those around them seemed to realize that this moment was no longer just a prank, but a significant lesson in respect and discipline. Richard, still unable to believe what had just happened, began to retreat. A sense of fear gradually replaced his earlier confidence. He had thought that by throwing the coffee at the guard, he would get a viral video, thousands of likes and shares. But now, all he had left was panic in his eyes, unable to say anything except stunned disbelief. Before he could even recover, a change began to ripple through Michael. No longer the calm stillness. Now his gaze wasn't just on Richard. It seemed to pierce through everything around him. His gaze was sharp, like a knife slicing through the air, devoid of any weakness or doubt. It was a reminder, this is not a joke. This is respect, responsibility, and tradition. As Richard stood there, his eyes glazed, seemingly unable to escape the shock, the crowd around him began to change its attitude. Whispers of concern started to rise. First-time witnesses to the event began to realize that they weren't just witnessing a failed, viral trap, but a moment that would stay with them for life. And then, Michael moved forward. A powerful step, but also measured. Not rushing, not showing off. He didn't immediately confront Richard, but slowly moved forward with calm certainty. Each of his steps echoed on the cobblestones, making soft but sharp sounds, like a drum waking everyone from their daze. And as Michael drew nearer, the change in the atmosphere became clearer than ever. All eyes turned to him, and no one in the crowd could fail to feel the power of the calm authority he projected. Those around began to realize that Michael wasn't just a guard, but a living symbol of honor and discipline, representing all that is noble in society. Richard, at this point, dared not look at Michael anymore. He turned his face away, avoiding that gaze. He began to feel a rising humiliation, as if he had done something unforgivable. The shame crept through his body, making him unsure of what to do next. At this moment, he no longer thought about social media or the likes on his video. He just wanted to hide, to escape the eyes of the crowd. Michael approached Richard, but without haste. A step, then another, until he stood directly in front of Richard. Now, there was no mockery, no taunting looks. Everyone waited for Michael's next words. A solemn moment, as if the entire square had quieted, waiting for a transformation. Michael didn't rush to speak. There was no anger in his eyes. He just looked at Richard, not to confront him, but to let him understand that thoughtless actions not only have consequences for the individual, but also insult a tradition he could not possibly comprehend. Not a shout, not a crude gesture, just a look. That look was like a gentle slap to Richard's mind, making him realize the power of discipline and respect he had never experienced. Richard stood there, his eyes unwilling to meet anyone else's, even though all around him were eyes full of disapproval and condemnation. Sighs echoed through the crowd, and Richard could do nothing but feel the shame rise within him. What he thought would be a harmless prank had now turned into a nightmare, and he couldn't find a way to escape it. Those nearby, tourists who had once smiled at his foolish actions, were now silent. They realized that disrespecting a royal guard was no small matter. A woman in the crowd leaned toward her friend and whispered, "I can't believe he would do that. These guards have spent their lives protecting the country, and yet he treats them like a joke." Her words rang out like a wake-up call, not just for Richard but for everyone who was there. An elderly man, who seemed to be a veteran, stepped forward and looked at Richard with eyes full of disappointment. "Do you understand?" he began, his voice steady and clear. "We're not just protecting a building. We're protecting values that others can't even begin to comprehend. Honor, responsibility, and discipline. Things that a prank like yours can never understand." Richard dared not say a word, only bowing his head in silence. Michael, the guard, still stood there, his eyes never leaving Richard. He didn't need to do anything else. Just by his presence, Michael had taught everyone a valuable lesson about respect. Not through words, but through his actions, he demonstrated that patience and respect aren't just beautiful theories, but essential values in this world. At this point, a young family nearby, with small children looking at Michael with admiration, stepped forward. The mother gently turned to her daughter and said, "Do you see? These guards are not just standing there for us to take photos. They're standing there because they have a duty to protect values you can't fully understand yet. Look at Michael. Do you see his strength? Not physical strength, but strength from self-control, the respect he has for his job." The mother smiled softly, as if she were teaching her child a lesson deeper than any lesson in books. Richard stood there, his face flushed with shame. He began to realize that his actions were not just a senseless provocation, but an insult to all those who defend values he would never understand. He asked himself, had he ever truly understood the meaning of respect? Had he ever thought that he could be a part of something larger than internet fame? A group of Japanese tourists, witnessing the scene, lowered their cameras and bowed to Michael. None of them spoke, but their act of bowing spoke volumes. They understood that this wasn't just a royal guard. This was someone protecting sacred values that not everyone understands. And that is true strength. "Never underestimate someone else's duty," said a middle-aged man standing next to Richard, his gaze serious. "We can joke around, play with everything in life, but when you face someone who truly has responsibility, you'll realize you're nothing." His words hit Richard like a cold shower, and he realized that not just him, but the entire crowd, was looking at him with disappointment, with shame instead of admiration. At that moment, Richard realized something he may have never considered. Social media, with its millions of likes and shares, could never compensate for the disrespect he had shown. Respect, honor, and discipline, which Michael represented, are things that no video, no joke could replace. These values will endure beyond time, surpassing all the changes that come with it. And this lesson will resonate for a long time in the minds of not just Richard but everyone who witnessed it. As Richard was escorted away by the police, the atmosphere around him grew heavier. He no longer received the attention or praise he once dreamed of. Instead, the gazes of the crowd were no longer full of curiosity or excitement. Every look now contained disappointment. Each step Richard took, every time he glanced back at the royal guard, Michael, was a reminder of the disrespect he had shown. The feeling of shame spread deeper and deeper, as Richard realized he was not only being judged by the crowd but also by himself. Michael stood there, still holding his position, no unnecessary movements. He didn't need to do anything further. His actions had said it all. He had delivered a powerful message through his patience and calmness, reminding all of us that respect and discipline are not values that can be easily overlooked. They are the solid foundations on which any society or culture must be built. Every eye was on Richard as he walked away, one of those moments he would never forget. It was a moment not because he was the center of attention for fame, but because he realized that respect and discipline are the things that truly deserve admiration. The feeling of shame overtook him, but not only because he had failed in his prank, but because he had failed to understand the value of people like Michael. The crowd, though not speaking out loud, knew deep down that they had witnessed an important lesson that day. And that silence, the respect in every look, was something Richard could never have predicted. As Richard was led away, a major shift began within the crowd. Whispers and disapproving glances toward Richard gradually transformed into respect and admiration for Michael. Those who had once treated this as a form of entertainment were now starting to recognize the significance of the moment they had just witnessed. Parents nearby began to explain to their children why Richard's actions were wrong, why the Royal Guards were not just a game or a photo op for tourists. A mother turned to her daughter and said, "Do you see? That is real strength. Not violence, but self-control, respect for the job and responsibility." Michael stands there not because anyone asked him to, but because he understands the value of what he's doing. Her words were a small but deep lesson for the children standing there, looking at an example they could follow. Respect, discipline, and patience are not things that can be achieved immediately. They must be cultivated and practiced over time. A group of young men, who may have once laughed at Richard, now stood together, no longer making jokes. They began to wonder if they had ever truly understood the value of discipline and respect. One of them whispered, "Maybe we were wrong. Maybe we never really understood the guards." Others around them started similar conversations. They no longer saw the guard as a prop for tourist photos, but as a person with a mission and responsibility deserving of the utmost respect. Michael stood there, saying nothing, his position unchanged. But his steadfastness taught everyone watching an important lesson about honor and discipline. A lesson not just about respecting others, but about understanding and practicing respect even when no one is watching. This moment, though only lasting a few minutes, left a deep mark on all who witnessed it. It was not just a simple event about a failed prank, but a profound lesson in the value of respect, discipline, and responsibility. Every action, every word has a greater impact than we realize. And sometimes, it only takes a moment like this to realize that the values we consider obvious can be forgotten in this modern world. Richard learned a valuable lesson that he would likely never forget. Social media, though it can bring temporary fame, cannot replace enduring values like respect and discipline. He could no longer rely on pranks to build his reputation, but must instead rely on right actions, thoughtful thinking, and most importantly, respect for others. This story may have ended, but its lesson will continue to be passed down. Michael, with his calmness and patience, has become a symbol of something far greater than a simple joke. He is a model of respect and responsibility that we should all strive for. And those who witnessed this moment, whether they were tourists or locals, will always remember that respect is the foundation on which a civilized society is built. Each of us can be part of this story, and the lesson from Michael, the Royal Guard, will live on in all of us. A reminder of the power of discipline and respect in a world that is constantly changing.